Okay. We'll go ahead and start with the housekeeping rules. So this meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you're not speaking. The chat function for this public meeting is disabled. All chats will go directly to staff. Unless you are participating during the meeting, please turn your video off. This allows the active meeting participants to be seen on the screen. You will still be able to hear the meeting, and when you are participating, please turn your video on. If you have any trouble, you can send us a chat. The city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distractions during the meeting. That is all.
All right, so welcome those of you who are here to the June 25th, sorry, that's not it, the July 1st edition of the MMTC meeting. Since we do not have a quorum, we are going to be limiting this event to just the study session, but it is going to be a very interesting one, I think. So we're going to be talking about the Brick Streets Sidewalks policy, the draft version, I suppose, and Cece is going to lead us through the gist of it, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And I was a silly goose and forgot to bring my laptop, so I'm back here, but whenever I'm done with my brief presentation, I can come over to the table. I don't know what best facilitates the conversation, because I definitely want it to be that. I want to have an active chat with y'all after first going through a handful of slides that I think best sort of give an overview as to what we're looking at. The draft was posted on June 11th. There was a 15-day public comment period, held an open house, and some of the things that I've gathered for you both in the staff memo, which I handed you all a printout of, were some of the themes I noticed people just needing a little bit more information on, and so that's what I'll be running through today, as well as just a brief bit of background. I last saw you in February, where you approved creating this subcommittee that's done the work with me on this, and we'll just sort of jump in from there. The overall vision, mission of the Brick Streets and Sidewalks policy was to balance the preservation of Lawrence historic brick streets and sidewalks with the need for modern accessibility and infrastructure maintenance. And you'll find standards for installation and maintenance, as well as maps and some specifications in the draft policy. The policy was really built on these three sort of building blocks in this sweet little triad of bricks. I thought was a fun visualization of the staff working group, stakeholder committee, and then the community value survey. The Brick Streets and Sidewalks subcommittee worked alongside an interdepartmental staff group that provided technical expertise and assured feasibility and practicality throughout the drafting process. That included engineers, members of our asset management team, ADA compliance team, historic resources, forestry, MSO field ops, and then both transportation planning and land use planning. This is a defining feature of this policy, and I believe what has made it a workable draft. The previous iterations didn't have that sort of strong working group that held the draft up to our code needs and whatnots. And then the stakeholder subcommittee, they met 4 times over the last few months to discuss priorities and conflicting values, reviewed public comment, and came to the conclusion of the draft that you see before you today. We'll meet again after this study session meeting to hear the feedback from the public, the feedback from y'all, a meeting with the Historic Resources Commission, and then we'll have a final draft before we see MMTC again in August. That steering committee was made of the folks that you all approved back in February: neighborhood groups, accessibility task force, Live Well, Douglas County, KU, and HRC, as well as Ed from the Multimodal Transportation Commission. And then the value survey. So this was recommended by the subcommittee to host a citywide survey asking about values for both brick streets and brick sidewalks. So on the screen in front of you, you see the brick sidewalks priorities listed on the left and streets on the right. The committee used this as a framework for how we took the policy and what direction we went with. So for brick sidewalks in the policy, you'll see safety, accessibility, and sustainability as those top 3 prioritized values, and this was reflected by including clear and detailed installation standards, prioritizing the comfort and comfortable movement of all people, especially those with limited mobility, and identifying how brick sidewalks should be maintained and where they're appropriate. And then for streets, safety, sustainability, and tradition were the top 3. And that was reflected in clear and detailed maintenance standards, prioritizing the reuse of historic bricks in street design, and then identifying how exposed brick streets would be preserved and protected.
So those are switched. I just want to make sure that the accessibility is for the sidewalks.
That's correct.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No worries. I was just like,
Oops.
accessibility on the streets, but not on the
Yep.
sidewalks. Huh? Okay.
Sorry
cool.
about that.
No worries.
Yeah, so this is streets, safety, sustainability, tradition. This is sidewalks,
That makes
safety, accessibility, sustainability.
sense. Cool. Thanks.
I'd be interested in the definition of a couple of these. Like for sustainability, I feel like the average layman's understanding of it is like sustainability is green stuff, right? Like what's the carbon emissions, water emission? I have a feeling for this, it's more like how easily can we maintain these for a long time? Is that what
So
that
I
was?
had, with this value survey, I had a list of all of the values and how they could be interpreted, and you're
Okay.
absolutely correct that each of these is, what safety means to each person can mean a variety of things.
Okay.
But the way that we utilize sustainability for streets was reusing that material, the historic bricks, and for sidewalks was assuring that the standards were durable and so that they lasted a long time so they were sustainable.
Okay.
And the subcommittee followed along with that mindset.
And do you know how many people took the survey?
137.
Wow.
Nope, 173, sorry.
Wow.
173.
Okay. Cool.
And the all of the survey results are on the project website. If you haven't checked it out, I got the short little URL, lawrenceks.org/brick, and everything's on there. So if we have time at the end, I can show you more on that, but it's all on our project website. The next couple slides are all about brick sidewalks. So I'll talk about brick sidewalks, and then I'll talk about brick streets, and then sort of wrap up with what's to come, and then we can open up for as much conversation as we have time for. So the first thing to keep in mind with the brick sidewalks and the policy is wherever existing brick or stone sidewalks remain in good condition, so remain and meet accessibility ProAg standards, they should be preserved and are permitted to remain, regardless of location. I think we had a decent amount of misinterpretation of the maps, and we'll sort of talk about as a staff work group how we can maybe better present that in the policy, but we're not taking away anything in good shape, anything in good condition. We're not removing any brick sidewalks that meet ProAg standards. The policy really comes into play with sidewalks that are not meeting standards. So the policy says when brick sidewalks have fallen into disrepair and do not meet MSO design criteria or ProAg standards, then they shall be reconstructed to the standards described in this policy. ProAg standards are federal guidelines. They were recently adopted in August of 2023, and they outline the accessibility standards for any area in the right-of-way, so sidewalks, ramps, that sort of thing, and there are no exceptions for historic properties or historic areas. That was a big question with the subcommittee, asking if there was a property or a ramp that was X years old, how it might be excluded, and that is not the case. The brick streets and sidewalks policy will ultimately work alongside the ADA transition plan, which is being worked on with our Evan Corinta and the ADA compliance team to assure brick sidewalks are protected and preserved in historically significant areas and provide standards for installation that can meet these ProAg standards. So on page 12 of the policy, it's the first map you see in here. My next slide's a picture of it, but we had a lot of questions at the open house and in public comment about that policy applicability map. It may fare from a better name than policy applicability map, but it ultimately identifies where the subcommittee thought brick sidewalks were most appropriate. Sidewalks outside of that area, if they're in good shape, as I said before, they absolutely can remain. But it utilizes local, state, and nationally designated historic districts, as well as zoning overlay districts to signify which areas may have newly installed brick sidewalks or brick sidewalks reconstructed. When the map shows areas where property owners could choose whether they want to construct brick or concrete sidewalks in the public right-of-way. The subcommittee did not have interest in requiring any particular property have a brick sidewalk. They wanted that choice, and that was really important to reflect in the policy. And the intention for that map is any property owner in that area has that choice.
If they do exercise that choice, do they have to construct that to a certain standard?
Correct. Any sidewalk, since the PROAG standards were adopted with the ADA transition plan going into place, they all have to meet the MSO design criteria and the PROAG standards.
Okay, cool.
So here I'm showing that map that's on page 12 on the left, and on the right is an approximate area of where the brick sidewalks are in the city of Lawrence. This isn't exact. In walking around quite a bit during the policy development process, I found a handful of sidewalks that maybe they had changed since this data was collected, I think back in 2017, but it is a general good idea of where they are. The red area shows that local, state, or nationally designated, as well as the zoning district overlays. I can let you know what different ones are if you're curious. But I think when reviewing the map, something a lot of folks noticed was that a majority of East Lawrence is not shown in red. That's because although this area is historic, it isn't on a local, state, or nationally designated preservation board site, and it doesn't have an overlay zoning district like what downtown or the Oriad neighborhood has. However, the East Lawrence neighborhood has been in the process of updating their plan for the last couple of years and has discussed intent for an overlay district. The land development code, or per the land development code, overlays are intended to conserve the cultural resources, historic resources, and property value within an identified area or neighborhood. And having a overlay in that area would also allow them to have design criteria and other things of that nature. But in the policy, it states that should other areas have historic designation or overlay districts, they would be added to this policy applicability map.
So just to make sure I understand, in the context here, does overlay district mean neighborhood design guidelines? Because that's what East Lawrence is going to have. But if that's the case, then Pinckney does have neighborhood design guidelines. And I think maybe some other places on here do.
Overlay district is specifically a zoning overlay district. So whenever you're looking at the zoning code and you see RS-UC, that is the urban conservation overlay district. So this isn't picking out where are their neighborhood design criteria. This is specifically aligning with the zoning map.
Okay. Interesting.
So on to overview of the brick streets. The brick streets in Lawrence were largely constructed over 100 years ago, and many are reaching the end of their life cycle. The policy aims to assist the decision-making process for where to prioritize reconstruction and resurfacing for these brick streets because we're sort of past preservation. And historic brick pavers are a finite resource. The historic brick mill, dating back to the 1890s, made a finite amount of bricks, and we're trying to figure out how to best utilize them. The policy identifies all exposed brick streets and alleys and proposes to preserve them through the use of two different preservation statuses. So here is a map of that. It's also in the policy on page 20. Streets with primary preservation status, those are the ones shown in red. shall remain exposed brick, and all maintenance work, including utility repairs, will prioritize completing those repairs with historic bricks. Streets with secondary preservation status, that's yellow, and again, these are just the exposed brick streets. They should remain brick, however, they may be maintained with city standard material to prioritize preservation of those primary status streets. The policy aims to assure the exposed brick streets with higher concentrations of residential driveways are prioritized through the use of that red primary preservation status. And these streets were chosen with the assistance of the staff work group and the brick subcommittee. Should the need arise to source additional brick pavers for, say, 8th Street was being reconstructed in brick and they ran out of bricks, the policy identifies where they can be salvaged from should the city stockpile run out, and that includes alleys with secondary status and alley aprons. Currently, that process, up to this point, each project sort of does their best to utilize what bricks they have, and then whenever they need more, it's been a decision by decision, project by project basis. And then this map also, I believe it's on page 19 of your policy, shows the existing conditions of both exposed brick in red as well as asphalt overlaid brick streets in that sort of brownish color. There's been interest in there's been interest expressed to uncover asphalt streets to expose the brick below, but this process isn't as simple as it sounds. These covered brick streets are found in various conditions, and frequently the time-intensive process of removing the asphalt can further damage those brick pavers. The policy proposes a new process for the city, which provides a path for neighborhoods to express which covered streets they have desire for restoration, and it's something I'm really excited about within this policy. Up to this point, property owners and neighbors have been left to reach out to engineer of the day or try and hope that they're at the right point in the city budgeting process to get a covered brick street uncovered, and this creates a system for them to, or a path forward for that.
So would this be a separate queue, or would it be integrated into the existing street maintenance schedule?
What do you mean queue?
So like when Steve, right, when he has his kind of 5-year plan, I think now it's like, all right, here's all the streets that we know are rough and we're going to do a mill and overlay of some sort, and they bring it to us for those, like, is there a bike lane that we can do, right? But since I would bet the best opportunity to remove asphalt from a brick street is when it's really bad, then I wonder if like this process kind of gets added into that street maintenance schedule. I don't know.
So I can point you to where in the policy we talk about that. In the street section, which is, I believe, all of the 7s,
Okay.
You'll see maintenance talked about for exposed brick streets, and then the covered brick streets is a pretty large section, which states if a covered brick street has been identified by a adopted neighborhood plan as having desire for restoration, then the depending on what the level of maintenance needed, so utility cut, capital improvement project, or regular maintenance, there's different steps to be taken, but that is all carved out in the policy currently.
So I guess maybe an example would help kind of wrap my head around this. So say people on New Jersey Street
Okay.
got together and on their block, they're like, man, we'd really like to get this back to brick. Would they then call MSO, find the engineer of the day, and say, like, we are interested in this?
Currently, or in this policy? Or if this policy were to be adopted?
I guess, yeah, in the policy, like, how do they get on the list?
So they identify the street as having desire for restoration on an adopted neighborhood plan. Those adopted neighborhood plans are included in Plan 2040.
Neighborhood plan,
So
gotcha.
then it would be a part of the process for if a street on this map, covered street, let's talk about that for now. If a covered street on this map is going to have a capital improvement project to do major reconstruction, they would first assess, is it included on a adopted neighborhood plan, and if it is,
Okay.
then the steps forward are here. But ultimately, it calls out, The city shall review the feasibility of restoring the street to exposed brick. A determination of feasibility may include available funding, level of reconstruction, asset management plans, expected timeline, future maintenance, etc. And a final determination will be shared with the appropriate neighborhood group prior to construction.
Okay, I think that makes more sense. I was thinking of this as like a routine maintenance thing, but it sounds like it's more like a complete reconstruction thing, like when East 19th Street was redone, or when 9th Street's going to be redone, like capital improvement plan level of stuff.
There's also a section on utility cuts and regular maintenance that's lesser than capital improvement projects. And that generally states that if a street has been expressed as desire for reconstruction, but it's a covered street, right now if there's a utility cut, the bricks are taken out, the utility's fixed, and then it's a one-off conversation with the historic resource administrator and the project engineer to say, what do we do with these bricks? Do we put them in our city storage? Do we put them back? And if there is a neighborhood desire for that street to be reconstructed in brick, this says put the bricks back so that then they can be utilized for the project should it be reconstructed later. If there isn't, then they can take those bricks and put them in storage.
Okay, cool.
But that process came out of talking with the staff work group and understanding that this has been a problem in the past, that there's been all of these conversations of what do we do in these different circumstances and no policy to direct staff on what to do and no policy that allows the public to understand or what to expect. The next part was talking about the Plan 2040 and the neighborhood plans, but the other thing that this map shows is not all streets are appropriate to be reconstructed in exposed brick, so that can include arterial streets and bikeways, and those are the various lines shown in color on the map. So neighborhoods can have desire for an arterial street to be redone in brick, but this policy says that's not the priority. The priority is streets in historic areas and ones that don't otherwise have conflicting classifications on them.
You just said it's not the priority. I thought the issue was that it just can't happen. Like if it's a collector and arterial, like you're not getting brick on this thing.
That's correct.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. It was like, oh, maybe there's a chance, but no, that seems like it'd be very loud to have an arterial of brick. So, okay, cool.
And so here's a summary on the left side of the screen of what's happened thus far in creating this sort of brief overview. I was excited and honestly impressed that it aligns pretty closely to what I presented to you in February. So we've run a pretty tight process. The subcommittee has been great to work with, and I really value the buy-in that they've had and the conversations they've been having with their neighbors, as well as the staff working group prioritizing getting together to assure this policy works for both staff and the public. And to come, I had mentioned we have a staff working group meeting as well as HRC and then the subcommittee meeting later this month, and then I'll see you again August 5th to hopefully have a recommendation of approval before City Commission in September. But in looking at the policy, if you have any recommendations, the subcommittee would love to hear it. We've not yet gotten that feedback, and I think that'll be really valuable. So I might stay up here. I have a handful of pictures and other things I can sort of move the screen around to. This is the project website. Shows the draft. The draft has been reviewed by legal, has recordings of all of our past meetings as well as the presentations that I've shared and some of the public events that we've held, as well as links to some of the other pieces that were interworked into this policy.
Well, cool. Glad to hear it's been going so well so far, and looks like a pretty great policy so far. I didn't really have a lot of disagreements for the most part. It's like, yeah, this looks good. Do y'all want to go first with any comments, questions?
Just on like where there's sidewalk crossings on brick streets, how do we reconcile accessibility with that?
So the crosswalks are included in what ProWag standards say have to be accessible. And this policy didn't go into great detail on crosswalks. I understand that there are MSO design criteria already for crosswalks. And just now I was looking in the Section 7.7 of the policy calls out accessories, driveways, alleys, curbs, and crosswalks. So it says, where a crosswalk provides access by sidewalk, curb ramps that meet ProAct standards must be provided at both ends of the crosswalk. The crosswalk width should be 10 feet wide and shall not be less than 6. On exposed brick street, the installation of varying colored brick or natural stone may be used to enhance the aesthetics and visibility of the crosswalk. Alternative designs or treatments may be considered by Dave.
So it can be in brick.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. I feel like in other cities I've seen relatively newer brick crosswalks, but walking through East Lawrence, there's kind of an interesting one. It's like 12th in Pennsylvania or something, where it's like somebody must have hand poured asphalt over it to kind of make a better crosswalk. It's pretty funky. So I wasn't sure if that was because like it can't be on bricks, but it may have just seemed like a good idea at the time. So.
ProAg standards, I've dug through them over the last handful of months, and they don't really call out a lot about materials as much as they just call out smoothness.
Geometry.
So assuring that the width and the smoothness of the ride sort of fits within their standards, that it has the right slope, then the accessibility standards are really okay with whatever.
So I gotta be honest, 1/4 inch sounds really, really small. Is that even possible with like vintage brick, or do you have to have like brand new sharp edge brick? It seems like they'd be so bumpy, you know?
It is. We have, I think the bricks outside of City Hall, the bricks at the corners of the Mass Street are good examples of accessible bricks. There's also new brick sidewalks that were laid as part of the 9th Street project, and they used historic bricks. And those standards with the AB3 base and with how they were set are a big part of how we came to the standards that are in this policy.
Okay.
It's definitely possible. You'll sometimes see on that 9th Street section, it was funny seeing like short cuts of bricks to really make sure that they were packed in tight.
Oh.
But they absolutely meet ADA standards.
Interesting. Okay. Well, it's good to know. That's something I would have been worried about. So.
Utilizing edge restraint, I think, is also a big piece of how to make sure brick sidewalks can be accessible. That's sometimes what's referred to as like a king's row. Along the two sides, you'll sort of see them raised up, but there's also metal edge restraint. There's sometimes limestone edge restraint, but that keeps it sort of tightly packed in there in addition to the other installation standards we call out in the policy.
Okay.
Do those restraints prevent it from, like, the brick from moving around more?
They help. They absolutely do.
And sourcing the historic bricks, how does that work?
So if we're speaking to sidewalks, and there's an existing brick sidewalk that the ADA transition plan approaches, and it's in the area that you can have a brick sidewalk, then I imagine the first call of defense will be utilizing what's found. And then after that, additional policy work needs to be done to sort of call out how we will source bricks. So this policy doesn't go into a funding mechanism of purchasing bricks or talk in detail about that, but there are likely going to be folks who decide that they want a concrete sidewalk for whatever reason, and then those bricks will be able to be utilized for other projects. So I'm hopeful that there will be sort of a sustainable cyclical system here.
Do you know of any past projects where a formerly covered brick street has been restored?
Yes.
Cool. Like in Lawrence even? It
Yes.
sounds hard. Like I'm not even envisioning the kind of machine that would like delicately mill the asphalt away from the brick without damaging the brick. But if it can be done, sweet. Okay.
Definitely is time intensive. Part of the reason why the policy calls out neighborhood plans as being the mechanism to express that desire is because we don't necessarily have the funding or the time resources to just go out there and start doing it. It has to sort of take neighborhoods having that initiative to say that they want it, to have that group consensus, to put it in a neighborhood plan, and then we can evaluate it with the other tools that we have within asset management.
Okay.
So a neighborhood that's not in this sort of study area we've looked at could request brick.
So it would have to be a covered brick street. So,
What exists now as a covered.
correct. The policy calls out that there shall not be any new brick streets that have not historically
Got it,
contained that material.
got it, okay.
So that was the one thing I actually disagree with. I think everything else was awesome, and I'm totally for it. But I think it's unfortunate that we're limiting ourselves to only concrete and asphalt in the future, because as we try to slow traffic speeds in neighborhoods, and maybe look at redoing downtown with like a new master plan or something, brick is a really good tool in your toolbox to slow down traffic on streets. So I would say, if at all possible, could we keep that option just in case there is a point in the future where we're like, okay, so Vision Zero says we need to slow these cars down to 15 miles an hour. We're not going to be able to, narrow the street by moving the curbs, but could we change the paving of it to make it slower? Because signage only works for some people.
I mean, I think there's much more cost-effective ways to slow streets down, like, speed bumps or whatever.
I mean, I'm not saying we should require it. I'm just saying not allow it, right? I mean, for like downtown, for example, right? Like Mass Street and Brick would be kind of cool, actually, right? It would not be only to slow traffic; it'd be for aesthetic reasons as well. Whereas I think on just like a random residential street, probably not likely that they're just gonna, put bricks up instead of like planters, for example. Like that'd be a lot easier, I think.
I mean, I'm guessing this is really expensive, and so it doesn't, I don't know.
Yeah, do we have
Yeah.
information on cost comparisons? Like,
I don't have that information available right now. I've reached out to our asset management team to get some numbers ahead of going to you in August and then going to City Commission, because I think that that'll be a necessary part of the conversation. We do know that brick streets are more expensive to install, and that maintenance over time, there's graphs that other communities have created showing that. I can bring that to you in August if you'd like.
Like the maintenance costs, long-term costs?
The general trend.
Okay.
yeah, another
But
question.
yeah, I can discuss that point about new brick streets with the subcommittee if you'd like. I don't know that I saw that reflected in the public comment received of the survey, nor the public comment on the draft. And it wasn't included in the discussion that the committee had. So while it may be interesting, I don't know that I've heard a very loud voice from the general public wanting that.
I kind of hate to go here, but I think there may be a little bit of provincialism with a lot of folks who, don't get to travel very far outside. I realize that a lot of the world does pave in brick on a pretty regular basis, and it works pretty well. So it could just be lack of experience. So like nobody's even thought that brick is a new thing. Like in the U.S., brick means old, and stone means super, super old. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's just like not even in the consciousness of the average person. So, and again, I should stress, like, I'm not saying like all our streets should be brick. I'm just usually of the mind of like trying to strip away regulations that are kind of more micromanaging than really anything else. It's like, if it doesn't hurt us to allow them, then, may as well allow them, right? Like unless there is like an active harm by allowing brick streets, like it seems like such an unlikely scenario anyway that like, why regulate it, right?
Snow removal is a major issue or consideration with brick streets, as well as the necessity to have sort of specially skilled folks to maintain them. And I don't know that our existing city staff includes a lot of that. So that would just be an additional consideration if there were more brick streets.
Right.
Yeah, and the main thing is, like, for new streets, the upfront costs are,
Yeah.
you're building like a street on top of a street almost essentially. So it's at least about twice the cost. When we rebuilt some brick streets because we have a concrete or asphalt base and then come back and inlay the brick. So it's just a very, as far as upfront costs, the maintenance,
It's also time intensive.
yeah, we're still kind of looking, we don't have good data on maintenance costs. I mean, we generally maintain the streets, like snow plowing, obviously we do snow plowing when we need to, but we don't do a whole lot of brick patching in areas. And so like Cece said, we're looking at some costs for our asset management and life cycle costs for maintenance. But I think that's just the the main thing is the upfront cost of rebuilding the streets. So we've done a few where they were overlaid with asphalt, but we completely rebuilt them. Like we're not intending just to remove asphalt and then maintain existing brick because they just deteriorate so quickly.
Yeah.
But
I would assume with vintage bricks, you probably have to like, almost like take them out and start over again, because like they've degraded to the point where it's just too rumbly of a surface.
yeah.
Depends on the
What we've learned through
situation.
our experience of rebuilding some of the streets, some of the streets in Lawrence have 2 layers of brick and some have 1 layer, like a base layer. So
Interesting.
generally speaking, the base layer is like in really good shape, and then the surface layer is not in very good shape. So the majority of the base layers has been reused and not the surface layer because they're worn.
Yeah.
But when we've rebuilt them, we take all the bricks out, they all get mixed up, and you have to sort through them hand by hand to find the ones that are good enough to put back in the street, so, but,
So for new brick streets, is the typical way of doing them, I guess in Lawrence at least, to like hand lay every single brick? Because there are machines that can lay bricks and they're way faster. Like, yeah.
I've seen
A
some
tenth.
videos of the machines, I don't know any communities that have used those,
It's probably a very specialized contractor that's nowhere around here. So
yeah.
Kansas City has enough. You'd think they might have availed, but I mean,
I was surprised in researching this policy development and seeking out other best practice in other communities. A lot of the communities that I've gone to with brick streets, hoping that they would have a brick streets policy, don't. It's a lot of non-maintenance for those historic things, which is sort of, I think there are going to be a number of other communities seeking out policies like this because a lot of brick streets are reaching the end of their life cycle from whenever we first started to see them sort of put in across at least the Midwest.
yeah.
I mean, I disagree with you on this. I mean, not only is it the maintenance cost and the upfront costs, it's like, I mean, there are old world cities in Europe or the East Coast that have brick streets, and they're not necessarily, like Boston isn't necessarily comfortable to traverse with those brick streets, but I don't know what their maintenance looks like on them. But I understand they're like sort of natural, traffic calming elements, but I don't.
I'm sort of approaching this the same way I would approach zoning, right? Like if it's not going to harm somebody to have a duplex in your neighborhood, then don't prohibit it, right? Like even if it's never going to happen, it's kind of unnecessary to have just a law just to say like, we're just going to micromanage this thing where like it's not really going to hurt anybody, you know?
I mean, my concern is accessibility, right? Because right now, like,
But on streets though?
well,
Need
crossing
people
the
to drive.
streets if if you use a wheelchair on crossing the brick streets. That's why I asked about
Yeah.
crosswalks earlier, but like,
But if it's
they're
a-
really difficult.
We also have a number of areas that still don't have sidewalks in the city. That we had some public comment calling out areas without sidewalks that had brick streets that folks are having trouble in assisted devices rolling down them.
I mean, if you were making a new brick street, you would construct the crosswalk to ProAg standards. Problem solved, right? I mean, it's not like you would just like toss in a slapdash asphalt patch and call it a day. So I think that concern is probably irrelevant. But anyway, it's a small nitpick, and if it does make it in, it's not going to be a bad policy. So I'm still totally okay with all of it. What was I looking for? I think that's all I have. There was one section where it says that there's acceptable safety standards are listed. I forget what context I saw that in, but it's like, okay.
That may be
that mean?
the conditional site considerations for location criteria on 6.1,
Maybe
page
that's it.
2.
Okay.
And if this isn't it, then I'm happy to keep looking. But
I'm in the right place.
we found in looking at best practice and talking to our staff committee that there were some conditions that a brick sidewalk may not be considered the most safe or workable, and that was whenever sidewalk grade exceed 5%, as well as existing conflicting utility infrastructure. And that's mostly in the way of like storm inlets.
Okay. So for streets, like sidewalks, I can understand because there's a direct like ADA accessibility standard, but I feel like for streets, I saw it somewhere, and I wish I could have.
It
Actually, wait,
may
no.
be in relationship to the various criteria shown on the existing condition map, or the
That's it.
principal arterial, and collectors.
Could be. Man, all right, anyway, sorry, I guess in that case, it's kind of relevant if I can't really find it, but I guess what I was hoping to get to is like acceptable safety standards. Some of them are like intrinsic to brick, like when it ices over, brick is way more slippery than pavement and concrete. So like, almost regardless of the age, brick is gonna be more dangerous, but like, is the safety criteria some sort of metric like friction coefficient or more crashes per, lane mile or something? I'm gonna see if I can look it up.
I can also
We need to move
control,
on. That may do it, actually.
you said safety criteria?
It said acceptable safety standards is the phrasing I saw.
Enforcement,
Just wish I knew this.
as well as existing exposed brick streets must be properly maintained by the city to meet acceptable safety standards. Wherever exposed brick streets remain in good condition, they should be preserved. However, when brick streets have fallen into disrepair and do not meet safety standards, they should
That's
be
the one.
restored and repaired as resources and funding are available.
Yep, that was the one. Okay, so yeah, for 7.0, when it says acceptable safety standards, is there like a standards organization like an ADJOURNMENT or an ACTO that is referencing?
I can look into that a bit. I think that this came out of discussions with the staff work group about how do we implement repair in situations where it's understood that it's not safe.
Yeah, and I would probably, the way I interpret it, I guess, is safety. It's not like friction coefficient or things like that, but if there's big deflections or deformities or ruts in the road where, damage is occurring to vehicles or people can't cross the street or there's missing bricks, those type of just public safety standards, like
Yeah,
like
that
an
makes
asphalt street could not be safe if there's potholes or deformations or things like that, sinkholes.
So that one is the pavement condition index, right? So is there like an equivalent for brick, or does the PCI like apply to other kinds of paving as well?
That's a good question. We, as we are doing our PCIs now, not manually, but we're driving the streets.
Yeah, with
The
LiDAR.
brick streets are excluded from the, I guess, the mechanical rating system. And so we are going to, there's criteria that's kind of a industry standard that's been established to rate brick streets manually, like 0 to 100. So we're going to do that, hopefully here by the end of the year, and establish baseline PCIs for all of the exposed brick streets that we have.
Okay.
So that we can then just set a standard, an asset management standard for maintaining to a certain PCI. And then with our maintenance program, the maintenance portion of this, it would be, funds that are in Steve Lashley's maintenance, street maintenance program could be applied to patching brick streets or putting sand in, or whatever we need to do to maintain them, just general maintenance. So yes, that is certainly an intention going forward.
Okay.
From the maintenance perspective, not reconstructing, but just maintaining them. So, yeah, that's still going to occur here by the end of this year, I think, just rating them, and then they'll all have PCIs, and won't be exactly this apples to apples with an asphalt or concrete street, but it's just in the context of the brick streets, we'll be able to say, well, this one's better than this one, or we can see deterioration rates as we go over time, as we do this every 3 or 4 years, rate the PCIs and see how they're performing and
Yeah.
how much money we spend on them, and then how much, how we're able to maintain that PCI level. So
Cool. Sorry, just see somebody mess with my mic outside. Okay, good. It's not my mic. Got a little bit worried.
is it inside?
No, it's outside, but it's locked up. I was just worried. Like I saw a bike upside down. Like, oh no, but no, it's fine. Okay.
But I can ask the staff work group if there's any further clarity we can add to that statement.
It'll probably be in like the engineering design standards at some point, right? That makes sense. I just hadn't thought about like, oh yeah, pavement condition index, duh. Yeah, that's logical. I saw a couple public comments asked about like, hey, you guys should talk to masons and bricklayers and stuff. Were you able to find any? Did you
Yeah.
get some input? What did they say? I'm curious.
So I've talked to a member of the Lawrence Preservation Alliance about brick masonry, and he's pointed out a couple different examples of where brick sidewalks, more so than brick streets, have been laid, and he sent me pictures, and we talked about standards for a while. He thought that the installation standards in the policy were strict, but he understood after we talked about how it needs to meet accessibility standards, and that hasn't necessarily been something that, especially historic sidewalks, have been held to previously. He talked a bit about whenever covered streets are exposed, that there's a need to be really careful in that situation, and had concerns about using like trucks to do that. He recommended people go out by hand, and yeah, overall, he didn't have any direct issues with the policy. He might speak at the Historic Resources Commission, because I think he's more familiar with that group. But I believe also the standard detail sheet and specifications, in talking with the engineers on the staff work group, they've talked about how, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's a common practice where once MSO design criteria are made, they sort of send them out to engineers and to folks in the field to make sure that they make sense and make any edits that are necessary. So that'll be a part of this as well.
Okay.
And the sort of nice thing about having an administrative policy is that this will ultimately be on Craig's desk as the city manager to approve, and that includes any amendments. So if we do find things that don't work in the policy later on, it will be sort of a straightforward process to assure that the policy works as we want it to.
Okay. Sounds good. Any other final comments, questions? I've run through my list, so.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, does ProAg have a standard for like how a sidewalk would be evaluated? What is the line when it's considered outside of ProAg standards? Do they have a standard for, is that someone out in the field with a tape measure? Or?
It is. It's, complaint basis, or with the ADA transition plan, as I understand it, has a 25 or 30-year plan where they intend to sort of review every sidewalk segment in town and determine if it meets ProAg standards or if it doesn't. So that'll be a person with a tape measure going out to assess slope, to assess trip hazards and things of that nature. There isn't really another mechanism that I'm aware of to assess whether it does or doesn't meet those standards.
Yeah, there's some technology that's out there that you can use LiDAR or things to and do some inspection, but it's probably not to the level of detail for some of the areas that are just out of compliance. It can pick up areas that are definitely not compliant.
Right.
And so we've kind of looked into that a little bit, but yeah, as we've been doing our sidewalk improvement program, we've just relied on people going out in the field and actually visually doing the measurements for the most part. But
Yeah, I guess, so like the root of what I'm trying to get at, like it's a good policy, and like obviously everyone's not going to be happy, but I think it's probably really close. But like hypothetically, if a homeowner has an existing brick sidewalk, it's found to not meet ProAg, they're outside of the area, and potentially it's going to be cheaper. Let's say hypothetically it is cheaper for them to bring that existing brick sidewalk up to ProAg. Should the policy force their hand at repaving in concrete, or should there kind of be I guess the pathway, hey, if it's proven to be cheaper for that homeowner, to just bring that existing one up to standard.
We found that with brick sidewalks, whenever they're not meeting standards, it's generally the base that's an issue.
Yeah.
And where spot repairs can handle certain upkicks from bricks, or if the edge restraint gets removed by some kid, those issues, I expect whenever this policy goes into place that everyone in the whole city will know about it and will look at their sidewalk and sort of figure out how this policy applies to them. And if they have a brick sidewalk and they are outside the area, my hope is that there's some, property owner interest in fixing those issues before the ADA transition team comes into that area and assesses the sidewalk and then makes a determination about whether it does or doesn't meet ProWAG. So those one-off situations where someone just needed to dig the brick in a little bit deeper, I don't imagine that will be something that the ADA transition plan will try and stick it to the property owner. In the sidewalk improvement program, we've seen quite a bit of flexibility. And we, as city staff, are always trying our best to work with what is currently there. But the sidewalk applicability map, the brick map with the red overlay, I think there may be discussions from public comment with the subcommittee and with HRC about if there's any interest in expanding that area. And so I'm not sure what that'll look like at the end of the day and what it'll look like whenever I come back to you in August, but that may be less of an issue if that area is expanded. If everyone sort of has that option.
In recent bids that we had for sidewalk replacement, the reconstructing the brick sidewalks were about 4 times the cost of a concrete sidewalk.
Yes,
And that's with-
like a concern that's probably
So-
a non-existent thing.
Yeah, and there's some areas where it was just like, there was like one a house or two of brick and the rest of it's concrete. And so you got a whole block and then section of brick. And so, but yeah, they will have the option to go back
Correct.
to brick. But yeah, it's a cost thing, and usually the ones that are out of compliance, it's more than just an area, it's rebuilding the whole sidewalk, so.
Or like excavating it from decades of silt that have accumulated on top of it. I mean, there's a lot of brick sidewalks where you have to mow them before you can really see them, so.
Yeah,
On the screen, I'm sharing the subcommittee met with the ADA compliance coordinator, Evan, and he sort of walked us through what the different categories of access barriers are within ProWAG. And then I just sort of, it's really hard to see, but I put a couple circles on here. So, there's some situations where maybe just these bricks need to be settled more, but situations like this, that's likely a full reconstruction, or areas where it's a narrow sidewalk, needing to fix those issues. Slope and vegetative overgrowth were other examples of those access barriers.
So I guess in terms of enforcement, I kind of understand it, but I guess to make sure I'm on the same page, like, will brick sidewalks basically no longer be exempt from the sidewalk repair program, where it's like, now if your sidewalk is identified, I think we're at the point of using heat maps of potential travel, right? Like, it was sectors, and then it was like which sidewalks are the most important for pedestrians. I guess regardless of how they're identified. So like now, if you have a brick sidewalk, you can't be like, well, I can't reconstruct it because I don't know how to do it. Now they're probably all going to be in scope very quickly, I would bet, because I would imagine these are probably some of the highest priority sidewalks in the whole city, because this is where people actually walk.
So I don't see it being implemented or enforced very quickly. With the 30-year ADA transition plan, that's, quite a long time for the sort of city budgeting process to assure that we have the funds to enforce and install all those new sidewalks. But the enforcement is tied to the ADA transition plan and to ProWAG standards. So you're correct that there won't be brick sidewalks that are You used a word that now I'm having a hard time remembering, like exempt.
Yeah.
Every sidewalk needs to be accessible.
So the sidewalk repair program, knowing that it couldn't possibly go through all of the city like at one time and assess it and then rebuild it and have property owners rebuild their own sidewalks, it was originally divided into these sectors, and they're like, all right, we're going to see how bad everything is. We're going to spray paint the gaps or whatever, and then send people a bill when it's their time to fix it. And then that switched to, like, I was trying to recall some kind of heat map of like, all right, this is like the really heavily used sidewalks. This is very much more important than like somewhere on a Wakarusa, right? So a lot of those places I think have already been gone through as the sidewalk repair program has kind of gone through the city. So it's like, would there be backtracking to places that had already been passed over because they were brick, but they were in the middle of a walkable neighborhood?
I imagine so, yes, but that will be handled through the ADA transition plan, not this policy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would say that we've been avoiding some of the brick sidewalks through that program. We've done some on long stretches where we've rebuilt a whole block of sidewalk, but we've been waiting to have this policy completed before we started looking and inspecting the brick sidewalks.
So it sounds like then, if this were in the sidewalk repair program, which it's not really, then it would be probably a lot of financial burden on property owners very quickly, kind of by surprise, maybe if you don't follow city stuff. Whereas in the ADA transition program, maybe it's a more gradual implementation. Is that the idea?
So another piece of this, I shared it on the poster I had at the open house. The sidewalk repair program, speaking to the sidewalk improvement program,
That's one.
I think that the sidewalk repair program probably also existed at some point. It's gone through many names and
Probably.
iterations, but the staff currently expects through the funding mechanisms that the ADA transition plan will sort of include that sidewalk improvement program, so they'll all be funded through one source.
Okay.
And the cost partnering, the current model, it has to go before City Commission again. I believe it's later this summer that it'll go before the commission, but is similar to the sidewalk improvement program, where there's cost partnering based on the amount of sidewalk you have, as well as the income of the property owner, and there are other considerations about the city taking on additional permitting costs and labor costs, and sort of that material cost being what is split with the property owner. So I understand that cost sharing is a big concern for a lot of folks reading through this policy. It was definitely a big concern of the phone calls I got through the development of this, but I believe it'll be included as part of that transition plan.
I mean, realistically, if somebody wants to transition their bricks to concrete, it sounds like they can. Which would
Correct.
be significantly cheaper, and it would be the same as if their concrete sidewalk was busted up, which in older neighborhoods it probably is. So like, if the end result is the same, even if you have a brick sidewalk now, at least you have the option to just go the regular way. So it's like, nobody's forcing you to keep a brick sidewalk, which is good.
Correct. The other thing I forgot to mention earlier is that the current policy for the city is that if you have a concrete sidewalk, you cannot go to brick. And that is changing as a part of this policy. So this policy says anywhere in the policy applicability map, you can have either or. So I think some folks are going to be excited to have concrete sidewalks and maybe have always hoped and dreamed for a brick sidewalk, and now they will have the exact standards on how to install it, and bippity boppity boo, all their dreams come true.
So when you say the map, like this whole page or just the red parts?
The red parts.
Okay. Okay. Huh. So North Lawrence never had brick streets or sidewalks? Isn't that the oldest part of the city?
That's not what the map is showing.
Yeah, very interesting.
And
Just
if-
kind of-
But no, that's, I'm saying, if that's how you're interpreting the map, that's not its intent. So you can see on the slide I showed earlier, we're at our time, I don't want to
Oh, sorry.
go over, but there are sidewalks that are brick that are outside the policy applicability map.
yeah.
So there are some segments here of brick sidewalk.
Oh, okay. I just couldn't see all the way. I have pretty good vision, but not quite that good for color, I
There's
guess.
also a covered brick street.
Okay.
Is, however, on a collector.
That makes sense. Okay, so in that case, if somebody has a concrete sidewalk but they want to go brick, they have to be within the red areas on this map to be allowed to do that?
Correct.
Okay. Weird. So even in East Lawrence, that is rife with brick sidewalks, you can do it if you wanted to.
The policy applicability map includes local, state, and nationally designated historic districts and overlay districts. If East Lawrence were to seek out an overlay zoning district, they would absolutely be included in the policy applicability map.
All right.
So there's a path
Yeah.
for the community to get together and get there yet.
You got them bricked. Yeah. Okay.
The map's also subject to change. With an HRC meeting, another subcommittee meeting, it may look different by the time you see it next. And if you have any suggestions on how to change that, I can bring that to the subcommittee.
Sure. I mean, I'm not thinking a lot of people are going to be like jumping at the chance to spend 4 times what their sidewalk would normally cost to get a new sidewalk, but you never know. Maybe some people just have money to burn, like, God, put some bricks down, so who knows? But if they're interested enough, then they should talk to their local neighbor association and get that on the plan. All right. Cool.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you so
Good.
much.
It's moving so fast, and it's really pretty close, it seems, so very exciting.
If we don't have quorum, can I ask some questions now, or do we wait?
Questions for,
Like the end of August, and one thing I was like, I'm on this Vision Zero subcommittee, and that won't be tied up by August, and, you know, like, there's an open survey right now, you know, we're sort of
Yeah.
still in the middle of it, and so I guess for things like that that have lead times, I assume they'll go to the new committee, or what are your thoughts there?
yeah, don't know yet. I would assume that if people that are on committees like Vision Zero can continue to serve on those, they
Yeah.
should,
Yeah. for sure.
depending on, yeah,
I will,
yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, all I would say is that our last meeting is in August for the MMTC. The applications are out for anyone that's interested in serving on the Connected City Board, and we anticipate those to start in September. And just working through logistics on what day and time. I would think it would likely be the same time as this meeting, but it may not be. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Would bylaws be established by staff, or would it be like a template by staff, and then the first meeting is like, all right, let's get this together?
Yeah, there's no individual bylaws by boards. There's the overarching, I think it was the resolution or the structure of the boards that will apply to all the boards, but
convenient.
boards in themselves will not have individual bylaws.
Cool.
So it's trying to be consistent across the board. That's my
Board
understanding.
of boards. Yeah,
So-
that does make it a lot easier. Cool. Okay.
But yeah, so we will need, it looks like Pat is online, but we were short one person to have a quorum. We will wait till 6:15, and then if we do not, we will postpone the 2 regular agenda items we had to August. So, and they are not super time sensitive. We'll have a lot of stuff on the agenda in August, so.
So we have to officially cancel the meeting, like on camera, right? Like everybody
Yeah.
get up there and, okay, yeah. Okay. Sweet.
Yep.
Thank you.
If there's any other questions you guys have about the board and stuff, as we transition, I have questions too about some of this, how it's gonna work.
I bet the application process is kind of black box. Okay, I understand wanting to be down there. Okay. Well, let's call the July edition of the MMTC meeting to order then. So we've already had our study session, but we do not have quorum as it stands currently. We have 4 people, and 3 in person and 1 on the call. Our bylaw state that we must have 5. So because of that, we can't even really go into approving minutes. So I should note, though, staff items and commission items there's no vote required. It's just kind of informational. Should we still go into those after, like, whatever I'm saying here? Or do we have to skip those as well?
Yeah, we're not going to have those either.
Okay.
No public comment and no meeting.
Okay.
But if there are commission items, you can email them or talk to me individually after.
All right. Sounds good. Well, in that case, since there is not a quorum, then I guess we're just adjourned essentially. So our agenda items as well as the remaining things on the agenda are going to be pushed to August.
Yes, the
That'll be
2
our last-
regular agenda items will be on the agenda in August.
Yep, and that'll be our last meeting.
And we're not receiving public
Unfortunately,
comment.
no. Yeah. But you can still email us, so.
Yep.
Sorry. So, all right, well, meeting's adjourned then.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.